Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a great method of painting the avatar of Khaine for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. And to do this, what we've done is build our miniature in the classic combination. So the Wailing Doom is in the form of a sword, and we've got that head that's got the two almost horn-like devices on it and the big plume as well. Now it's worth noting all the methods and techniques we're going to be showing you can easily be applied to any other build that you might want to make. So we hope you enjoy this video, and we'll see you at the desk. To paint the avatar of Khaine, the first thing that you need to do is to build your miniature, and then you need to undercoat it. And for this one, I've gone for Mechanicus Standard Grey Spray from Citadel, as this is my common starting point for most miniatures. It's a really good colour for starting out a model like this, because really any colour we apply over the top of it will take to it very well. However, most of the model is red, so if you do have access to a red spray paint, you might want to go for that instead. The choice really is yours. Just bear in mind, if you do decide to do this, it'll take a little bit longer to base coat the white details on as we encounter them later on. So whatever you choose though, what we're going to do is start out with the real core of the body, so that kind of like magma sort of part that forms those muscles and things around the middle of the miniature. And to do this, we need to start out by base coating them with a nice deep red. So the colour I've picked out for this is Khorne Red, and to apply it I've got a monster brush from the Army Painter, but really any sort of medium to large brush like this will do just fine. And with this, what we need to do is just set it up for that base coating. So it's just a matter of getting some onto your palette, thin down as ever with that little bit of water to make sure it's not too thick straight out the pot. And then all you got to do is start identifying these areas and blocking them in. Now, as I mentioned, what we're looking at here is the kind of middle of the body. So if we take a look around the centre and around here, it's all these muscles and things that we've got. So we just need to get the brush in all the nooks and crannies around here and just block it all in. At this stage, don't worry about anything else, like all these kind of details we've got and straps and things, because we'll block them out later on. Just make sure you get all of these muscles, including around the neck just here. I've finished blocking in all of that red across the body, and I just want to quickly point out before we move on, it's very easy to miss, but actually the palms of his hands are the same material as well, so be sure to get those with Khorne Red too. And with that done, we can now move on to the next step, which is going to be to start to darken that red down, mainly looking for it to be darker on the flatter areas of the body here. Now we're going to use a black wash for this, which is of course going to settle a lot in the recessed areas in between all the cracks in the skin, but don't worry about that, we are going to make those really bright later on. So the colour I'm going to be using here is some Nuln Oil, and to apply it I've got that monster brush once again, so a good size for the sort of area that we're covering. And with this, we just want to paint a coat across all that red body that we've been doing, including the palms of the hands as well. And so I like to use a palette to control here how much I've got on my brush, just so it doesn't overdo it, because what we want to do is just start applying it over this red. So for example, if we look at the middle of the body here, just want to paint it directly over this detail so it settles in that texture and starts to darken the red down on those flatter areas. Again, be sure to work it into all the nooks and crannies just to make sure you cover all this red, and then give it around about 20 minutes to dry. Once that wash is completely dry, we can move on to the next step, which is going to be to add a little bit of black detail into the miniature before we carry on washing things down, making it darker. And so for this black, what I'm going to use is some Corvus black, which is an off black really. It's actually a super dark grey, but by applying a black wash over it later, which we're going to do, what we'll do is get some depth and some shading to it and some subtle highlights too. So for this, what we need to do is go for a smaller brush now to apply it. I have a medium layer brush here from Citadel for a bit more control, because for a lot of this, what we're looking for is kind of these straps that go across the body. They sort of crisscross it. So we need that accuracy, because we need to keep this off the red that we've done so far. So for example, once that's prepared, if we take a look at his chest just around here, you can see some of those straps that are kind of coming off this sort of central design he's got. We're looking at areas such as just here, so we just want to block these kind of things in entirely. And as I mentioned, they kind of crisscross around his body. Now, in addition, at this stage, what we need to do is do the first colour on the plume. So if, like us, you're going to be doing in black and white, just want to block it in entirely with this colour at this stage. And because it's quite a large detail, you might want to switch to a larger brush. But again, it's just a matter of blocking it in entirely. Once you've found all those black details and blocked them out, the next thing to do is to apply a wash over those too, and at the same time we're going to darken that red down a little bit more. So for this, I'm going to return to Nuln Oil, only this time to apply it, I'm mostly going to be using that medium layer brush again, but you might want to have a larger one on hand for the plume because it's quite a large detail there. Because with this colour, we want to paint it entirely over all these black parts that we've just picked out, so all those straps and things like that. But in addition, we want to kind of darken down the red parts. So those kind of like magma panels, almost that form the majority of the body. We're looking for the middle of these areas and we want to apply it on those too. So that's why I need a smaller brush and to use the palette to control how much is on the brush at once. And once you're ready, then it's just a matter of painting it over these areas. So as I mentioned, anything that's black, we want to paint it entirely over. So for example, this strap running across here, we just want to wash it over like this so it darkens it down, leaving a little bit of Corvus black still showing on the edges. So this way we get that nice deep black for those details. But for those panels, as I mentioned on the body, you can see, especially around here, all those kind of sort of plates you've almost got around the abs just here. And what we're looking to do is to paint it in towards the middle of each of these panels, such as around here, to make it darker and closer towards black on each one. Allow that wash to completely dry, and then if you want to, you can make the red a little bit darker in the main parts of the body to bring it closer to that near black. And if you want to do this, what you need to do is apply another coat of Nuln Oil in the same way that we just did. So this is now only on the red, don't worry about the black, but once again, just paint it towards the middle of these panels, leaving some of the lighter red still showing around the outer edges. And there we go, I decided to add a third coat of the Nuln Oil on there, and you can see now that the red is really close to black in the middle of those plates. So ideal for the kind of appearance that we're getting, kind of like that sort of cooling lava is what we're going for with that. But now with that done, what we're going to do is move on to painting the brighter colour that appears in the cracks in between all of that sort of deep molten red flesh. And to do this, we're going to start out with some matte white from the Army Painter. Now the purpose of this is essentially to set things up so that when we start putting yellow over the top, it's going to be nice and bright. So this doesn't have to be the kind of thing where it's an even colour really, or a consistent colour. It just needs to have that white in the deepest parts, just so it looks really bright in those areas. And to do this, what we're going to do on the palette is just really heavily water it down. So I'm using a small layer brush from Citadel for this, and you can see I'm making it very, very runny. So bringing it right to that sort of point. The idea being here that as I paint it into those recesses, the water's just going to allow it to flow into those areas. So just need to load up a bit in your brush, just making sure you've got a good point on there so you have that control. And then we're looking for areas such as in the cracks on the middle of the body. So just around areas like this, we just want to very carefully just move the brush in to let it settle in the recess and just trace it along like that so you get that bright white line in the deepest area. Now you may need to do two coats on this depending how the first one dries. If it goes a little bit translucent and lots of red is showing through, just retrace your steps with a second coat like this. But you can see this way we're setting up that bright white so the yellow later on is going to be bright as well. And there we go, you can see that white in all those deepest recesses now, and that stage does take a bit of time with doing two coats there and having to keep it neat throughout, but it's definitely one of those stages to really take your time on because, well, the neater it is at this stage and the neater all the following colours are going to look. So if you need to neaten anything up with a little bit of Khorne Red, do so now, and then what we're going to do is add some yellow into this kind of fiery effect. And for this, what I've got is some Iyanden yellow, so on a Citadel's contrast paint, so great for flowing into the recesses of stuff like this. And I'm applying it again using that small layer brush, and this is a fairly strong paint straight out the pot, so I'm just going to thin it down with just a little bit of water just to take the edge off it. But it's nice orangey kind of yellow, so ideal for the sort of warm effect that we're going for here. And with this then, all we've got to do is get a small amount loaded onto the brush, use tissue as you need to remove excess paint just so it doesn't run out of control. And then essentially we're just going to retrace our steps by applying this into those recesses directly over the white. And what this will do is stain it to be a nice bright yellow, so ideal for what we want, and it's just a matter of just following it all the way around as neatly as possible. I finished applying that Iyanden yellow, and you can see it's given a slight motley appearance to it, with a few parts being a little bit more orange, which is ideal because we want that sense of things kind of moving beneath the surface of the skin there, and the tones of the yellows and the oranges just changing as he moves around. And what we want to do now is build that a little bit further by introducing some Blood Angels Red to it. So another contrast paint, and this one we want to thin down so it's nice and translucent. So as we put it on, the yellow is going to show through, and we're going to get a variety of oranges starting to happen. And so what we need to do is set that up on the palette using that small layer brush again, and I'm going to heavily water this down this time. So a really good amount of water on there, really bringing it to around about this sort of pinky kind of tone almost. So kind of bringing right down to that sort of area just there. And with that prepared then, we just want a small amount at once, and all we're going to do is just start introducing this fairly randomly onto the yellow that we've got so far, just to give that kind of, again, that mottled varying kind of texture to it. So for example, on the chest just here, I'm just going to look for areas such as this and just thinly apply someone like that, and you can see that yellow showing through, so it's going a little bit orange. Then I'm going to apply just a little bit above it there like that as well. Now, if you have any parts where it goes a little bit too strong and you want to dilute it down a little bit, just get a little bit of water in your brush and just kind of apply it and smudge it a little bit. And you can see it just fades the colour a little bit more into the yellow surrounding it. So now it's just a matter of just running around all this yellow once again, doing this until you're happy with it. Just be careful not to go too far here because we don't want to go too far away from the yellow. So just kind of bring it a little bit more towards orange. With that done, you can see now we've got that slightly inconsistent kind of yellowy orange going on in all the deepest recesses, so ideal for that sort of fiery kind of molten effect that we're going for. And what we now need to do is to start to neaten things up before we move on to highlighting it. And to do this, we first of all need a nice warm yellow just to even up kind of the very deepest areas on here. And so for this, what I've got is some Yriel yellow, and to apply it, definitely go for your smallest brush. I'm using that small layer brush from Citadel once again for this. And what we're looking to do is to look in those recesses for kind of the hottest areas, so the brightest yellowy kind of parts. We want to trace a little bit of this colour in the middle of those areas. So make sure it's nicely thinned down so that you have that control on it, and really make sure there's not much on your brush so that it doesn't catch too much of the area that we paint it into. Because what we're aiming for here is just some fine lines, kind of in these deepest parts. So for example, if we look around kind of the abs around here, you can see we've got some nice bright bits of yellow along there. So what I want to do is just neaten those and emphasize them slightly by just very carefully moving in and just running some of this yellow into that deepest area as a thin line right across the middle, just there like that. So again, we're looking for any sort of brighter areas, just thin lines like this, leaving some of that orange still showing around it, just to make it kind of really look that little bit hotter. Once you're happy with that yellow, we can then move on to making things look a little bit hotter by just adding a bit of white in there. We only need a very small amount. This is just going to be in those hottest spots, but to do it, you need a pure white. So I'm going back to matte white for this. And to apply it, again, I've got that small layer brush. And this time, we just want small amounts of this. So rather than picking out all of the kind of cracks that we've got in the flesh just here, we're just looking for the bits where that yellow's the brightest and just to take it a little bit further. So the application is going to be very similar to what we've just done. So making sure that paint's thinned in just the same way. And again, make sure there's not much on your brush so it doesn't run out of control. And then on the body, what we're looking for are those little bits of yellow where it's really bright. So for example, this one, what we've got just here, all we need to do is introduce a little bit of this white just into the middle of that area, just for that little hottest part of the lava. And with that, we've now got that really hot kind of fiery effect in the deepest recesses. And what we can now do is return to those kind of top plates that we've got and do some highlights here. And what we want to do is give the impression that they're hotter towards the edges of the plates where it kind of cracks and you see that lava underneath, then gets cooler towards the middle of those panels. So kind of building on top of what we started doing earlier on. And to do this, we need to apply 3 edge highlights. So we're going to start out with some Khorne Red, then move on to Scarlet, and then finish off with some Fire Dragon Bright. And we're going to be starting out with Khorne Red. And for this kind of thing, this particular technique, this is where having a wet palette is really useful because it can get the consistency of the paint to where we want it to be and keep it there for quite a long time as well. And for this first coat, we want the paint to be fairly thin because remember, we've already got some of this Khorne Red showing through from those earlier stages when we started washing down the middle of the panels. We just want to emphasize it and make it a little bit stronger. So we want to bring it down to about this kind of consistency. So a little bit watery, but the key thing is to make sure you just don't have loads on your brush so it doesn't run out of control. Now this is going to be an edge highlight, but it is quite a broad edge highlight, and because we're following some very organic shapes, you don't have to worry about being too accurate with it really. What we're aiming to do is to kind of follow around the outside edges of each of these panels. So for example, if we start on the abs just here, you can see this panel we've got. What we're aiming to do is to paint a line of this colour fairly broad, going all the way around the outer edge of this panel. So I just want to use the tip of the brush and just work my way around, just tracing that edge all the way around there like that. And you can see because the paint's thinned down nicely, it's flowing easily from the brush onto where I want it to be, and also it's quite translucent, so it's building on top of the Khorne Red that's still already on that edge. It's just strengthening it whilst also having that gradient as we get further towards the middle, just bringing it towards that darker, sort of cooler, almost stone that we've got just there. So now it's just a matter of taking your time and doing this across every panel, and just really take your time here because this is really building on that main effect of the miniature. As you can see, it's nice and easy to do and it's looking really good. With that Khorne Red done, we can now move on to Scarlet, and this is going to be much the same technique, again an edge highlight on all these panels, only this time we need the line to be a little bit finer, so this way we get a gradient going from quite a bright red on the very corner, then going to that dark red with Khorne Red showing, and then going to the kind of darker part that we've got beyond that in the middle. So again, it's just a case of using the tip of the brush and very neatly just tracing around the edge of each of these panels. And then finally, we're going to add a third edge highlight, this time with Fire Dragon Bright. And this is just to be focused around the parts that are hottest and the kind of the sharpest corners, really. So for example, that little white part we got just there, it's going to introduce a little bit of this orange as the edge highlight along that part to make this area just appear a little bit hotter. And with that done, we've now finished painting in that kind of molten magma that forms the core of his body. And so what we'll do now is move outwards onto all those red armor panels that appear on the ends of the limbs and, of course, his head. And to do this, we need to start out with a nice deep dark red. So I'm actually going to mix this. What I've got is some Khorne Red, and I've got matte black from the Army Painter. And I'm looking to make like quite a nice dark colour with this. You can see I've already got some of the black on the palette just there. I'm using a regiment brush from the Army Painter to get this set up too. So a good size to start out with, but you might want to have a smaller brush on hand for some more fine details. But what we're looking to do is to mix a dark colour that's going to be kind of like this. Now, it doesn't have to be exact, just something that's quite a deep colour like this, quite a nice rich colour as well, and then we'll be set to go. And with that all mixed up and ready, what we can do then is then thin it down as ever with that little bit of water to make sure it's nice and smooth, and then it's a matter of blocking it in. Now, right now, because I've been using this brush to make the mix, you can see there's a lot of paint on there, so what I'm going to do is just remove as much as I can off from the palette, make sure the brush is nice and clean so that the paint's not gumming it all up and getting into the ferrule and things like that, and then just draw up fresh. And this will give more control then as we start to block this in. And so what we're looking for is, as I mentioned, all of that red armour. So this appears at the end of each limb, so you've got the gauntlets and also on the legs too. So for example, around the knee just here, and we just want to block it all in with 2 thin coats. But also there's a little bit of this on the helmet, and there's also these kind of bands on his arms which appear just around here. So be sure to get these as well. Once you have that even dark red on all those panels, the next thing we're going to do is to start to highlight it. And for this now, what we're going to need is some Khorne Red on its own. But because I'm using the wet palette, the mix we had in the previous stage is still usable because I am going to be using it here. Because what we're going to do is a bit of wet blending. So remember that mix was Khorne Red and matte black. But what I want to do is set up just some Khorne Red next to it on the palette. And I've gone for a slightly finer brush this time. I've gone for a medium layer brush here from Citadel. And what I'm going to do is just prepare some of this so we've got access to it straight away. So thin down as ever with that bit of water. And we're just looking to make it kind of about that sort of consistency. Now I'm also just going to make sure I've got some of that darker mix still usable too, and just add a little bit of water in there, and I'm happy with that amount I've got on there. So what we're going to do with this is start to look for areas where we want to apply that smooth highlight on kind of the crest of the panel. So things like the knee, for example, the shoulders, that sort of thing. And I'll start out with the knee for the example, for which I'm just going to pick up some Khorne Red. And what we want to do is apply this onto the areas where it's going to be the lightest, which is going to be kind of like the crescent sort of towards the top of it. So I just want to quickly apply some in this sort of area here, sort of thinly painting it on either side. And then whilst it's still wet, what I'm going to do is just pick up some of the mix of that darker colour and just start wet blending the two of these together. So back and forth, just bring it down into that darker colour underneath. Again on this side, just back and forth, just bringing it down. Then just going to grab a little bit more of the dark colour, just to strengthen it and carry on bringing that down into the dark colour a bit further down. So this way you see I'm building up that gradient of colour, and it's going to be stronger at the top and darker at the bottom. Now I just want to make it a little bit stronger at the top, so I'm just going to get a bit more Khorne Red and introduce that in that area there, and you can see this way it's just building it up. Now the first time you do this you might still get quite a sharp transition of the colours working the way down, but don't worry about it, just let it dry and repeat the process, because the second coat you do over the top will kind of just build it up and it'll be a bit more of a smoother gradient that way. But you can see by just doing it on the fly and making sure all the paints are wet as they're drying, they're just merging together and giving us that smooth highlight. Now, this is something that we want to do on all these kind of areas where we get this sort of thing happening, such as the back of the calves, things like that. Even on the feet, because we've got quite a large area here. We want Khorne Red to be strongest as we get to the edge of these panels and these parts for the edge highlight that we're going to be building up. So once again, what we can do is apply some of this like this, and again, go for that gradient. So whilst it's still wet, just quickly grab some of the darker mix and just introduce that and just go back and forth, just kind of merge those two colours together. That way we get that nice gradient on that area. At this stage, I've finished doing that on this part of the leg only, so all this piece of the armour, and you can see that red starting to appear. But if you look closely, especially in the knee, you can see it's not perfect. There's a few little lines appearing there, and honestly, this is to be expected when you're wet blending, because, well, what do? You apply it as a few thin coats, because that first one, well, the colour's just building up, and what we're going to do is build on top of that. So once again, I've got some Khorne Red, and I'm just going to repeat this technique, just bringing that red a little bit further down this time, so to about there. Then quickly just jump to my darker mix of black and Khorne Red again, and just wet blend that as we go, just to merge those two together. And really just go back and forth like this, just playing around with it until you get that smoother gradient. But you can see, because I've done it on top of what we had before, because you see now the colour's stronger and it's smoother as well. So what I'm going to do now is carry on doing this on this leg, and then I'm going to repeat this process across all the rest of the red armour to start to build up this first highlight. And And with that stage done, you can see now we're starting to get a nice highlight on that deep red. And it does take a bit of time doing that, but it's definitely worth just really taking your time there to get those smooth highlights. There's nice gradients between the different tones of the colour. And now what we're going to do is push it a little bit further on some select areas. So kind of the largest parts that are catching the most light. There's really going to be on the pauldrons and also the knees. And for this, what we need is Sunz Scarlet. But because there's again going to be a little bit of blending here, I've also still got some Khorne Red that's usable from that previous stage. But first of all, I'm going to set up the Sunz Scarlet. And I'm still using a medium layer brush to do this. And what we want to do is get this again nicely thinned down, because what we're aiming to do is just introduce a little bit of this on the very brightest part. So only a small amount's needed. But you can see I also still have the Khorne Red usable just there right next to it. So what I'm going to do is start out with this. And I'll go again for that knee. What we're looking to do is to introduce it on the brightest part, which is going to be across the very top of it. So we don't need very much on here. What we want to do is just make sure that we sort of trace it with a fairly broad highlight line kind of around there, and then going around the other side there as well. And then, whilst it's still wet, we're just going to move over and grab some of that Khorne Red and just use that to wet blend it as it's settled on there, so we get that, again, that nice gradient going right up to that bright red on the very top. With that done, we've now got those nice smooth highlights on those smoother areas, but there are all the other edges that we need to highlight still, and that's what we're going to move on to now. And for this, we still need some Sunz Scarlet first of all, but then we're going to add an extra highlight to all these details, including those smooth parts, just to finish it off. For this, we need some Fire Dragon Bright. But first we need Sunz Scarlet, and to apply it, I've switched down to a small layer brush from Citadel here, because now I'm just looking at doing some edge highlighting. So we want precision with this, because we're looking for all those sharp edges. We just want to carefully pick them out with this colour. So we don't need loads, but you do need to make sure you've got that control over it. You can always test it on the palette by just having a go at seeing how it flows into lines, and it's looking a little bit dry there, you see, a little bit scratchy. So what I'm going to do is thin it down just a little bit more, and then just retest to see how it's flowing. So just set up, and then try again, and that's looking much better now, you see, much smoother. So I'm much happy with that. It means that we're going to get that result on the miniature. And so what we're looking to do then is to look for all sharp edges and just carefully run along each one. So for example, on the feet, nice clear example here. What we want to do is just angle our brush so that we're kind of approaching with the side of the bristles, and then just very gently skim across those areas, so very lightly like that. And you can see that results in a nice fine red line on those details. So just following it all the way down. Now, doing this does mean sometimes you have to turn the model in some quite strange ways. So, for example, like this to get towards the end of the foot. But as long as you're comfortable, then you'll get that nice result on it. Remember, it's just that sort of very gentle skimming motion. Now, if you can't quite get to the detail with the side of your brush like that, then what you'll need to do is use the tip, in which case just angle the model so you're painting downwards and towards yourself, and then just follow that edge all the way down. So along here, for example, just very gently, and this way you can get that control to get that nice highlight following all the way along that edge. Once you finish with Sunz Scarlet, you can then move on to Fire Dragon Bright, and this is going to be another edge highlight, but this time a finer one, focused more towards the corners and sharpest points. So for example, on the foot, you can see I'm just skimming it towards the tip of the foot just there. On each of these serrated plates too, I'm just going to again skim it just towards the end of each one, just for that final highlight to give that sense of sharpness. With that done, we've now finished highlighting that red armour, but there's still one more thing that we need to do on it, and that is a little bit of shading for it. And what we want to do here is a very controlled method of shading, because we've done a lot of work already with that highlighting. And already we have a bit of shading there with that deeper red in the recesses, but to really push it a bit further, we now need a pitch black. So for this, I'm just going to use some matte black on its own, and you can see I've got some just here on my palette. Using the small layer brush, what I'm going to do is just really thin this down to make it nice and inky, because with this colour, what we're going to do is just very carefully paint it directly into those recessed areas. So we don't need loads of this on the brush. In fact, we want only a small amount really, so we have that fine tip on the brush. But as you can see, I am making the paint quite runny, and it's just to help it flow into all those corners and things. So with that prepared then, we just need to load up, making sure we have that fine tip on the brush, and then all we're looking to do is to be as steady as possible, and we're looking for recesses such as around the feet just here. You can see the parts of those plates meet. All we're going to do is just very carefully move in and using the tip of the brush, just paint this directly in that deepest area. So very carefully in that area just there. And with that, that deep red armour is now complete, and so we can move on to the next area of detail, which is going to be all the metallic detail which is scattered across the miniature. And for this, there are two colours to go for. We need to start out with the bronze, for which we're going to base coat it using Warplock bronze, and then for the gold, we'll need some Retributor armour. We're going to be starting out with the bronze, which is kind of the deeper colour in some areas because some gold detail goes on top of that, so it makes sense to start out with the bronze. And so Warplock bronze, I'm going to be applying it using a medium layer brush from Citadel, and for this first colour, all we're looking to do is to block these parts in. There's only a few to do at this stage, so what we're looking at first of all is going to be, well, those great big horns on top of the helmet. So we're looking at these two large horns along here. We just want to base coat the main body of these all the way down to the base where they meet the helmet, so down here. Now, in addition, there is the forehead on the helmet, so we're looking at this kind of recessed part just here on which that rune appears on top of it. So we're looking at this kind of part going all the way around here. And then also there's a bit on the sword too. And for the sword, what we're looking at is this kind of central part that goes above the crossguard. So it's this part just going along here up to this point right here. With that done, we're then ready to move on to Retributor armor to start picking out all the gold details. And when doing this, feel free to change brush sizes as you need to. I'm starting out with a medium layer brush, but you might want to go for a smaller one when you're doing the more intricate areas, especially the parts that are going over the red armor. And there we go, all the gold has been base coated. Now that step does take a little bit of time because there is quite a lot of gold on there that can be a little bit hidden away, but it's all right because once that's all base coated, things are going to get much quicker because now what we need to do is apply a wash over the gold to get some definition on it before we move on to highlighting it. So here what we need is some Reikland Fleshsade, and to apply it I'm starting out with the medium layer brush again, but you might want to have a larger brush on hand for larger areas like the horns and things, because this wash we need to apply it over both metallics at the same time. So use the palette to help control how much is on your brush so that it doesn't run out of control, and once you've got that ready, you have a good amount on there. Just need to start painting this directly over all of that gold. So for example, on the helmet just here, just want to wash it all the way over so it settles in those recesses and gets that nice bit of definition. But as you get close to any other colour such as the red, just really take your time being as neat as possible as you bring it up to but not onto those red panels. And there we are, the wash is completely dry, giving that definition on the metallics. But if you look at the horns there, because they're quite large flat surfaces, you can see how the wash has dried on it and kind of given it an odd bit of kind of patterning on there as the light catches it. So that's because it's such a large flat surface, and to deal with that, all we need to do is just to layer some Warplock bronze back over those. So nice quick step, this one. We just need a small amount of this paint, and again I'm using the medium layer brush. And we're just looking for a thin coat across here on those flatter areas. So don't worry about the indents or the recesses, anything like that. Just make sure the paint's nicely thin for this purpose. So bring it down to about that kind of point. And then we just want to thinly apply it onto these flat surfaces. So what we're looking at here, this kind of area around here, just smoothly apply it onto the flat to get that shine and even finish back to it. With that done, you can see now we've got a much better finish onto those darker bronze areas, and so what we can do now is move on to highlighting all these metallics. And for this, what we're going to do is start out with some Sycorax bronze, which is going to be for that darker bronze detail, and then we're going to move on to the gold, for which we need some Liberator gold, followed by some Stormhost silver. But first of all, we need Sycorax bronze, and to apply this I've gone for a small layer brush because here all we're going to be doing is some edge highlighting. So for this technique, all you've got to do is make sure the paint's thin for the purpose, so flowing well from your brush, but not so thin that it flows out of control. So let's bring it down with a little bit of water and just test it until you're happy with the balance of it. And I'm happy with that there. So let's make sure there's not loads on the brush. And then on these darker areas, what we're looking for is just an edge highlight. And because in these parts, such as the horns just here, they're really clearly defined, it's very easy to move them with the side of your brush and just skim along that edge. Just make sure you turn the model so that you're comfortable as you do this throughout this whole area. With that dark bronze now highlighted, we can move on to doing some highlights on the warmer gold. And for this, what we need is some Liberator gold first of all. And here we're looking to edge highlight all these details. Now, these are quite thin, which means this is going to cover quite a lot and make this a much lighter gold, but that's exactly what we want. It's just a matter of making sure you just carefully approach these details, such as this banding here on the shoulder. Just very gently just skim along with the side of your brush just to pick out all those edges and corners. And then finally, we're ready for a fine highlight of Stormhost silver. And this is for all the gold parts that stand out the most and the sharpest details. So for example, we're looking at things such as just the very peak of this kind of trim we've got on the knee. So very gently apply the colour to that sharpest point around there to help it pop out a little bit more. And there we are. With all that done, the gold is now complete. And so with that completed, what we can do is move on to the next colour. And this is going to be the white detail, of which there's a few things to do. We've got the loincloth, also the face, and there's those white parts in the plume as well. And to do this, we're going to start out with a good solid base coat of some Corax white. So good coverage, nice paint for this kind of thing. And I'm applying it using the medium layer brush. So around the face, feel free to go for a smaller brush if you want a little bit more fine control, especially as you get to areas around the eyes and things like that. But for this, as ever, you just need to make sure the paint's nicely thinned down, and then it's just a matter of blocking this in. And you will have to do 2 thin coats here, so just remember to keep them thin and smooth so you don't get any texture appearing on them. So as I mentioned, we're looking at doing the loincloth, so all the way around this part here, is being really careful as you get towards the top of it. But also we've got his face, and this is where you might want that smaller brush, because you've got to very carefully just move in just to pick out this detail around about here. Now when it comes to the plume, if you want to, you could just leave it entirely black, but if you want to add the white parts on, it's just a matter of picking out the strands that are going to be white and just following them all the way back to the very end of it. Once you've got that even base coat on the white, the next thing that we need to do is apply some shading to it. And for this, what we're going to do is actually create our own wash, because for that sort of ivory kind of colour, we need some Rakarth flesh. And if we thin it down using Lahmian medium, we'll essentially create a wash here, so we'll get it flowing nicely into the recesses and stays nice and smooth and away from those raised areas. So we need to create the mix first of all, and to do this, I've got a monster brush from the Army Painter. I'm going to start out with a little bit of Rakarth flesh on the palette. So there we go, just a little dollop of that paint, and then make sure the brush is clean before getting the medium so we don't contaminate it with any colour. But then we want a good amount of this, so really load up plenty on your brush and get it onto the palette, and then start mixing them together so we create that kind of wash-like paint, but in this sort of like an ivory sort of colour. And with that achieved then, all we've got to do is paint it directly over the top of all these new white areas. So I'm going to start out on the loincloth, and I'll use this brush on the plume as well. For the face, you definitely want to go for a smaller brush for a bit more control, but it's just a matter of painting over entirely so you get it settling in those recessed areas. Allow that mix to completely dry, and then neaten up any black that you may need to do, for example, on top of that plume, because with that done, what we can now move on to doing is to layer and highlight these white details. And for this, we're first of all going to return to Corax white, and to finish it off, we need a pure white, so here I'm going to use some matte white. But first of all, we need Corax white, and to apply it, I'm going for the medium layer brush now. And what we're looking to do is to reapply this to the areas that we originally base coated white, but more selectively now, because we need to avoid the recesses where our wash settled most and became more strong. So it's a matter of getting it under control then, and then looking for those raised up more flat areas. So for example, on the fabric of the loincloth, what we're looking at doing is applying it onto the kind of area around here, so this raised up part like this, and then just not going quite into the deeper recess and leaving it darker in that corner. So going up to around about there, but otherwise just getting it as smooth as possible on these raised areas. With that layering done, you can see now the white is much neater, and so we can move on to highlighting it using a pure white. So here I've got some matte white, and I'm starting out with a medium layer brush for these initial edge highlights you can see around the fabric just here, but it's a good idea to have a smaller one on hand for some of the more fine detail, especially around the face. And here we're looking for, first of all, on the fabric and the plume to look for any details that stand out. So that's going to be things like the edge around here. On the plume, what we can actually do is approach using the side of the brush to skim along to pick out those kind of parts that stand out. But also on the fabric, we need to look out for the creases too. So you can see we've got a few of them really standing out at the front here. Just look for the very top of them, so the kind of peak of the crest, and just gently follow along in this kind of sweeping motion like this to get a highlight along these areas. And with that, the white is now complete. Now on the loincloth on the box art, there are of course some runes and things on there, but for those, what I'm going to do is apply some decals later on. But before any of that, what we now need to do is to highlight all the black detail. And for this, we need 2 colours. First of all, I'm going to use some Mechanicus Standard Grey, and then after that, I'll add a very fine highlight of Administratum Grey. I'm going to be starting out with Mechanicus Standard Grey, and for this I'm going straight to that small layer brush, because here it's just some edge highlighting on these black details. And remember, way back we did base coat and wash them, so they've had some shading already. So I'm going to pick out the kind of edges and raised details of these parts. So we're looking at straps and the black parts that are left still showing on the plume. So once your paint's prepared for edge highlighting, all you got to do is start looking for those areas. And so as I mentioned, we've got the straps first of all, and it's just a matter of, again, just holding the model so you're nice and comfy and can approach those straps at an angle of about 45 degrees against the flat, and then just work your way around those edges to get a nice highlight on those parts there. For the plume, the highlighting is really the same sort of technique we use for the white. Just approach the side of your brush and just skim across the raised texture just to pick those parts out. Once that's done, we can then move on to Administratum Grey, and this is going to be a fine highlight on the black. So here what I'm looking to do is just a very fine line across the top of these straps, just along here towards the source of light, just to help finish them off. And there we are, that black is complete as well. And so what we're going to do now is move in for some quite fine detail on the face, because now we need to do that kind of fiery effect. So this is going to be inside the mouth and also around the eyes too. And for this, we're going to start out with a base coat of Khorne Red, and then we need to apply a select wash of some Nuln Oil, so very carefully applied to these areas. But first of all, we need to base coat with Khorne Red, and to do this, definitely go for a small brush now. I'm starting out with a small layer brush just here. And what we're aiming to do for this first stage is just make sure the whole thing is this nice deep red. So Khorne Red's ideal for this kind of thing. So just thin it down so it's a little bit runny, so it can flow into those nooks and crannies easily. So kind of bring it down to that sort of point there. And then really importantly, make sure you don't have much on your brush, because you don't want it to run out of control onto all that white we've got in the surrounding area. And so with that prepared then, all we've got to do is work it into these areas. So we're looking at just carefully painting it inside the mouth. So really make sure you're bracing your hands so you're nice and steady, and just gently move the brush in and then just start colouring in these areas. So inside the mouth all the way around here, and also in the eyes too. So we're looking at in these recessed areas and the central part all the way around here. With that base coat done, we're now ready to move on to Nuln Oil, and for this all we've got to do is wash it over that Khorne Red that we've just painted inside the mouth and eyes. So very carefully applied in here like this, just to darken that red down. And there we are, with that wash dry, we now have that dark red in those details. And so what we can now do is move on to adding the kind of fiery effect here. And for this, what we'll need first of all is some Evilson Scarlet, followed by some Fire Dragon Bright. Then we need some Yriel Yellow. And finally, we'll just add a little bit of some matte white to finish things off. But first of all, we need some Evilson Scarlet, and to apply it, definitely go for your small brush again. I'm using that small layer brush, but feel free to go for a smaller one if you want to. For this, what we're looking to do is to, on the eyes, introduce some of this towards the middle of the eyes. So it's actually going to be the majority of them still, but just kind of centering in a little bit from the outside part so it stays darker on the outside. Whereas with the mouth, we need to go to the very back of it. So I'm going to start on the eyes first of all, and it's just a matter of really making sure you're braced nice and steady, because what we're looking to do is to move in to kind of paint it in this sort of area here. So the majority of the eye is now going to be this brighter red, but you can see I'm leaving it darker around the outside. So just gently build it up there like that. Meanwhile, for the mouth, what we need to do is just introduce this colour towards the back of the throat. So it's a matter of lining up your brush so you're pointing straight at it, and then moving in and just adding that red towards the back of the mouth. Next up, we can add some Fire Dragon Bright, and for this, once again for the eyes, we're just looking at centering the colour a little bit closer towards the middle of each eye. So we're now looking at this sort of area just here. Meanwhile, for the mouth, it's just a little bit more of this colour further back down the throat. Next up, we need some Yriel Yellow, and this is again a little bit closer towards the middle of each eye, so just very carefully now applied in this sort of area just here. And for the mouth, it's just a little bit further towards the back of the throat. And then finally, we just need a very small amount of matte white, and for this I'm not going to do any in the mouth this time. Instead, it's just going to be a little dot in the middle of each eye. And with that, the face is now complete. And as you can see, doing that really adds a lot of life to this miniature. And so what we can do now is move on to the next thing, which is going to be to add in the flames that appear around the miniature. And this will include that little flame that appears on the base as well, which we've left off here just so it doesn't get in the way. We'll paint those flames in the same way at the same time. For this, we just need to start out with a nice pure white to be the kind of hottest part of the fire and to make it nice and bright and vibrant too. So for this, we're going to use some matte white. And to apply it, I'm going to start out with a medium layer brush, but you'll probably want to have a larger brush on hand for doing the more open areas. The reason why I'm starting with this one is because around the body it does get a little bit intricate, so you do need to take your time around those parts. So prepare the paint for that purpose, just as ever making sure it's nicely thinned down, and it's looking a little bit dry at the moment, so just going to add a bit more water to that. And there we are, it's looking a bit better. So with this, I'm going to start out with the flames where they kind of meet the body, and you can see they're sort of erupting out of the kind of fiery lava-like body we've got in the centre. And so what we're looking to do is to carefully apply it just onto this effect. So very carefully manipulate it in there like that, just following those, and then just open it up as you get to the more open areas back here, where you might want to go for that large brush around that part. But you can see as it's close to the body, just really take your time and be as neat as possible. Once you have that even white and all of that fire, the next thing we're going to do is move on to painting it yellow. And the purpose of painting it white was to make this yellow nice and bright and vibrant. And at this stage, it is going to look a little bit weird. In fact, it's going to look kind of like egg yolk, but it is an important stage to go through as we build on top of this and make it go more towards reds. So what I've got here is Yriel Yellow, so a really nice warm yellow, ideal for this kind of thing. And to apply it, I'm using that medium layer brush. Though again, you might want to have a larger one on hand for the more open areas. But with this, we do need to be more precise than we were even with the white, because what we're looking to do is to apply apply it, leaving just a little bit of that white still visible in some of the deepest areas close to the body. So what you should do is make sure that paint's nicely thinned down so it's under control, and expect to apply 2 coats of this, though this stage is now going to be much faster doing this over the top of that white, as you'll see. But what we're aiming to do as we start to apply it close to the body around this sort of area here is just leave some of that white still showing as it goes very close to the body. So you can see I'm being very delicate as I apply the white at this part here, just leaving some of that white still visible in the recessed parts too, just very gently kind of mirroring the pattern of it going across here. But as we move further up, it's then just time to block the entire thing in. So you see now I get that nice vibrant yellow really quickly. So make sure you go into all the nooks and crannies as you go further out, making all this kind of area completely yellow. Now that we've got the yellow on there, we can move on to adding some more colours to really build up that fire effect. And for this, what we're going to do now is start moving up through oranges, through to reds, and then finishing off with a black. So what we need is some Fire Dragon Bright now. After that, we'll move on to Sunz Scarlet, and this is going to be followed by Khorne Red, and then finally a small amount of Matte Black. But first of all, we need that Fire Dragon Bright, and to apply it, what I'm largely going to be doing is the same sort of thing as what we just did with the yellow, only a little bit further away from the source of the flame. So I'm using that medium layer brush for this once again. I'm just going to get the paint ready just like we did with that yellow. So again, thinning it down so it's nice and smooth, and also a little bit translucent now because we want some of that yellow to be showing through to help build that gradient to these colours as we go along. So once you've got that prepared, what we need to do is start applying it onto the flame. And for this, again, what we need to do is kind of look to sort of continue the pattern of how the fire is coming out of the body. So you can see on this part just here, we've got those main parts going up there and up there. I want to sort of follow along that trail by bringing the orange a little bit further down those parts and then very lightly following it up, then getting heavier the further up that we go along here like this. Now, when you're doing an effect like fire in this way, it can be a little bit tricky to see how it's going to all be laying out as you go along. So something to bear in mind is that if you find that as you move through this, if you think the orange is a little bit too far down, you can always go back to the yellow and push it a bit further up. So don't feel like this is how it's going to be in the final thing. It can always be adjusted as you go along. But as you can see by adding this now, we're starting to get more of that fiery impression. I'm just carefully building it up. And as we go further out, what I'm doing is just being a bit heavier with it. So the orange becomes stronger the further along that we go. Once you finish with the orange, you're then ready to move on to Sunz Scarlet, and for this we're just looking to repeat this process once again, but a little bit further out now towards the end of the fire. Again, this paint's been thinned down so it's a bit translucent, and just steadily build it up towards the end of each flame. The next colour to apply is some Khorne Red, and this is once again just going to be a little bit further towards the ends of the flames. And remember, throughout this process, if you're ever unhappy with how the colours are being laid out, you can always go back to a previous one and reapply it a little bit further down. So just keep on adjusting until you're happy. And finally, all we need is a small amount of a pitch black. So here I've got some matte black, and with this, all we've got to do is just very carefully apply it just to the ends of these trails of fire. And with that, the flames are now complete. And remember, as I mentioned when we just started painting these, those flames that appear on the base, just paint them in the exact same way. And so with that done, now what we're going to do is move on to the bloody hand that appears on that bloody hand of Khaine. And to do the blood, what we're going to do is paint it with a really bright red and then apply some blood effect paint over the top to dull it down and get a nice kind of rich colour to it. So what we need to do is base coat this using some Sunz Scarlet, and then we're going to highlight it with some Wild Rider Red, followed by some Fire Dragon Bright. But first of all, we need Sunz Scarlet, and to apply it I'm going for my medium layer brush, and for this first step all we've got to do is base coat in the dripping blood. So we don't need loads of this, we do need to make sure it's under control, so just make sure it's nicely thinned down, and then it's just a matter of looking for all these dripping parts of blood that we've got going down the gauntlet just here, and just blocking them in entirely. Once you have that even base coat, you're then ready to move on to Wild Rider Red, and with this all we're looking to do is just skim along the kind of texture of this blood. So just going downwards like this, the paint only catches that raised area just to start to pick out that texture with some highlights. And then for the final highlight, we just need some Fire Dragon Bright, and with this all we're looking to do is again just skim it along, but we're looking for the parts that stand out the most. So for example, these blobs down here and the few that we've got along here. Now that we've got those highlights on there, we're ready to apply that blood effect paint over the top. And the one I'm going to use for this is Blood for the Blood God from Citadel. And to apply it again, I'm going for my medium layer brush. And what we're looking to do here is to thin it down slightly with a little bit of water so that it becomes a little bit more translucent, so some of that brighter red shows through. So we just need a small amount of water just mixed in there, just to take the edge off it. And then with that prepared, It's just a matter of painting this over that blood. Now, if you want to, you can do this over the entire hand, but here what I'm going to be doing is just sticking to the texture of this sculpted blood and just carefully applying it over the top like this to deepen it down and give it that shine as well. And with that, the bloody hand of Khaine is now complete, and so what we can do is now move on to the Wailing Doom. And for our miniature here, what we've got is the sword build, though whether you're doing the axe or the spear, the same method will work just fine. And the first thing that we need to do to get a really kind of fiery, almost molten metal appearance to it is to base coat it with a nice bright red. So here I'm going to use some Sunz Scarlet. To apply it, again, I've got a medium layer brush, though any sort of medium-sized brush like this will do just fine. And all we need to do for this first stage is just make sure we just base coat the entire blade with this colour, but as smoothly as possible. The smoother it is, the easier it's going to be for the overall effect to work. So really make sure you thin that paint down and go into this expecting to have to apply a few coats of it, because what we're looking to do is just build up an even coat of this colour. So this is going to be the entire sword blade, and the motion I'm going to use here is quite a smooth application. So just going to sweep it up the blade like this and just let that completely dry, then apply another coat in the same way. Now be sure to make sure the red gets into all the nooks and crannies here of the runes that we've got going up the blade, and in addition, don't forget to do these 6 little parts that we've got just down here as well. Once you have that even base coat, the next thing we're going to do is start to increase the heat of the colour really towards the centre of that blade. And to do this, we're first of all going to go to an orange. What I've got here is some Troll Slayer orange. And what we're going to do is start glazing it on thinly with multiple coats to build up the strength of this colour so it gets more and more orange the further in towards the centre of the blade that we go. So what we need to do is to set that up, and you can see I've still got some of the Sunz Scarlet there from the previous stage that I can use should I need to. But what I'm going to do is set up some of that Troll Slayer orange so we can start thinly applying this on. And if it does turn out to be too strong, we can always go back to a little bit of that Sunz just to take the edge off it a little bit. But essentially we want to add water to this to make it really thin, and what we need to do is test on the palette just to see how thin it's getting. Now this particular paint is really good for this kind of thing anyway because it's already very thin, so it's actually got a good basis to work from, but we want to bring it down to the point so that when we thinly apply it onto the palette it becomes quite translucent. Now at the moment it's too strong, so what we'd get there is too much of a jump between what we've got now and where we're going to. So what we need to do is add still a bit more water to it, make it even thinner, so just add that in there like that so it's nice and smooth. Then remove the excess, just load up a small amount fresh and then thinly test it once again. And now you can see the colour's weaker, so I'm definitely happier with that. So we're good to apply that as it is. So just make sure I've got a fair amount on the brush, and then what we want to do is start going into this looking to apply thin coats onto the flat of the blade, and the motion has to be quite a smooth motion. So I want to start up here and I just want to bring it all the way down thinly across the surface of that sword. You can see I'm not going quite to the edge, but I'm taking it all the way down to the very base of it there like that. Now because it's been put on so thinly, it'll dry very quickly, which means I'll just take a moment to do the other side. So again, just sweeping all the way down like this. You can see that that first coat is now completely dry, meaning I can go in for a second one, which I can apply to this side again to build up the strength of the colour. Now, at this first stage and this second stage, it doesn't look like much is happening, but every time you add another coat on, that orange is going to get stronger. So this way you can control the strength of it and make it brighter as you get further towards the centre of the blade. Now, if it ever does become too much, you can always go back to the Sunz Scarlet and thinly glaze it back over in the same way, and you'll find that just takes the edge off, so then you can reapply the orange and just make it that little bit stronger in a more controlled fashion. Having built up those thin coats of the orange, you can see now we've got a smooth gradient going from that deeper red on the corners going more orange towards the centre. And what we can do now is build on top of that by pushing it close towards going to yellow. Now I can't just go straight to yellow here because it'd be a little bit too much at once, so I'm going to do a bit of a mix here. And I've got Yriel yellow for it, and once again some Troll Slayer orange that I used in the previous stage. And with Yriel yellow, what I want to do is just get some of this onto the palette, still using that medium layer brush. And I'm just looking to make a mix of the two colours in the middle. So just build up a fair amount on there like that. You can see I've still got orange from the previous stage. What I'm going to do is just bring some of that across, just bring some of my yellow into there as well, and just make a kind of halfway sort of colour. So a very pale yellowy orange there like that. And with that mixed up then, what we need to do is apply this in the same sort of way as what we were doing in that previous stage. So thinly glazing it on. So on your palettes, you just need to really make sure that once again, you thin it right down with plenty of water, then test it just to make sure it's nicely translucent. And this is looking pretty good to me, so I'm happy with that. Perhaps just a touch more water in there. Yeah, I'm happier with that. So it's a bit more translucent, a bit more runny there. And so with this, just need a small amount on the brush. And again, it's just a matter of thinly applying it a little bit closer towards the kind of source of the heat, which is going to be in the middle of the blade. So we're looking at starting around about here And again, just thinly applying it all the way down with those multiple thin coats to build it up stronger and stronger until you've got a solid coat of that sort of yellowy orange. Once you're happy with that colour, the next thing to do is to push it closer towards yellow. And so now we just need Yriel yellow on its own, again applied using the medium layer brush. And we're once again going to do much the same thing. Looking to thinly apply this and just steadily build it up. And what we're aiming to have now is a solid amount of this colour just down that very central spot of the blade. So we just need to build it to that point first of all by again making sure it's really nice and thin. And as before, just test it on the palette to make sure it's translucent. And I think it needs just a bit more than that. There we go, that looks better, so I'm happy with that. And once again, it's a matter of just making sure there's not loads on the brush so that it doesn't start building up too much in any one area. But again, we're just looking to apply this close to the middle of the blade. So now we're looking at this sort of area just here, just thinly applied all the way down once again to get that nice warm glow in the very center, all the way down to the very base there like that. And in addition, what we want to do is apply it as a bit of a central highlight down the very middle. So for this, just make sure the paint's a little bit stronger. Just look for that central spot and just apply it just to this area down the very middle, just here, so you get that really bright, strong yellow down the center. And there we are, I built up that yellow, and you can see by applying a few thin coats of that glaze, followed by that solid line down the center, we've now got that nice gradient going from the colder kind of colors of the reddish colors at the edges of the blade to that really hotter part in the middle with the yellow. And what we can do now is push it even further in both directions by, first of all, applying a very light yellow highlight here. So to do this, I'm going to make a mix. I've got some matte white and also Yriel yellow for this. And once that's done, we're then going to return to the cooler parts of the blade on the edges, and for this, we're going to return to Sunz Scarlet. But first of all, we need to make our mix, and so this is matte white and Yriel yellow. And you can see I've got some matte white on my palette here, and also Yriel yellow from the previous stage, which I can just bring back in and just mix together. And we're looking for a very pale yellow and near white colour here, so something kind of like this just here. And this is just going to be for that central spar down the middle of the blade. The very hottest part of it is what we're looking for here. And what we want to do is to edge highlight onto this part. So you just need to make sure it's nicely thinned down as ever and make sure there's not loads in your brush. I'm still using my medium layer brush for this, but I'm not actually going to be using the tip of it really. I'm just going to be using the side of it because that central ridge is very pronounced on this sword, so it's ideal for this kind of thing. You just need to make sure you don't have loads of paint on your brush, and then just make sure you're nice and steady holding the model, because all we're going to do is approach using the side of the brush and just very gently skim downwards down that central spar. So just very gently like this to get this bright colour down the very middle of the sword. Once that's done, we're then ready to return to Sunz Scarlet, and this is now just going to be an edge highlight on the outer edge of the blade. Once that's done, we can now move on to just adding the darkest parts of the blade, which are going to be on the very outside of the cutting edge here. And to do this, what we want to do now is go to quite a deep reddish sort of brown colour. So we're going to go through two stages. First of all, we need to make a mix of some Sunz Scarlet and Rhinox Hide. And then once that's done, we just need Rhinox Hide on its own. We're going to start out with a mix of the two, so Sunz Scarlet and Rhinox Hide. And I've still got some Sunz Scarlet just there on the palette. I'm just going to add some Rhinox Hide into it to make a really deep sort of brownish red. Now for this, I switched to my small layer brush because now we're going to need a little bit more control over some parts, though not all the way through it, so you could stick to that medium layer earlier on if you wanted to. But the first thing to do, once you've got that mix ready, is to make sure it's nicely thinned down. So just add some water to it to really bring it down so it's nice and runny. Kind of going for this kind of consistency here. So you see a very nice warm reddish brown. And with this, first of all, what we need to do is apply another one of those edge highlights on the outside edge of the blade. And this is going to be kind of at the parts that go a little bit cooler. So towards the middle, just be very light. And then as we get further away from that center part of the blade, as we get close towards the tip, just be heavier on the application. So we get that darker line going all the way up to the tip of the sword. So like that. And then get lighter, just skipping past that very close central part just there, picking it up again on the other side, and then going all the way down to the very base, so stronger around there, and the little parts down here too. Now in addition with this colour, what we can do is start running it into these runes, and for this we just need a small amount in the brush, and this is why I've got that small layer brush. So I want to very carefully and very neatly just run it into the deepest recesses of these designs. And then finally, we just need some Rhinox Hide on its own, and this is going to be, again, an edge highlight. Don't worry about the runes for this one. Instead, just focus it on the coolest parts of the blade. So we're just looking at close to the tip, just very gently applied, skimming it on along there. And there we go. With that, the blade of the Wailing Doom is now complete. And as I mentioned, you can follow that technique to paint any sort of shape of blade that you're doing, be it the spear, the axe, or the sword like what we've got just here. But with that done, we can now move on to the final details of the miniature, which are going to be all those gems. And for this, you can really paint them any colour that you like. And what I recommend you do is paint them in the same colour gems that you have for the rest of your Eldari army. In our case, though, what we're going to go for is jade green ones and sort of pinkish ones. And to start out with for this, what we need for those jade green ones is some Incubi darkness. Then for the pinkish ones, we'll need some Screamer pink. Once they're all base coated, we can then wash over all of them with some Nuln Oil. So first of all then, I need some Incubi darkness, and to apply it, I've got my small layer brush, and here all we're looking to do is to select some of the gems and block them entirely with this colour. Now you don't even have to do all of them if you don't want to, you could just leave some of them gold if you prefer, the choice really is yours. In this case though, what I'm looking for is the larger ones. So for example, we've got one right in the middle of his chest. I'm just looking at blocking this detail in entirely. Once you're happy with all the gems that you're going to be painting with jade green, the next thing to do is to pick out all the ones that you want to be pink. And for this, I'm using Screamer pink. I'm just looking around once again for these larger ones, such as this one here on the forehead. With those base coats done, the next thing to do is apply a coat of Nuln Oil over the top of each of these gems to darken them down. And again, for this, stick to a small brush just to have that control as you apply it. Once the wash is completely dry, we can move on to highlighting all these gems, and to create the illusion of light shining through them, what we need to do is start highlighting them in a particular corner. And we're going to start out with the green ones. For this, what we need first is some Kabalite green, followed by Sybarite green, and then finally Gorse Blaster green. I'm going to start out with Kabalite green, and to apply it, definitely go for your small brush because you are going to need it here, because essentially we're just painting some lines in a kind of C shape, so we're looking for a particular part in a sort of curved shape for it. So you don't need loads, but you do need to make sure the paint's under control, so thin it down as you need to, until you got it to that right consistency where it flows nicely from your brush. So it's a little bit thin at the moment there, so I'll just add a bit more paint into it. That's feeling a bit better. So remove the excess off from the brush on the tissue, load up just a small amount, and then we're ready to apply it. And what we need to do is decide what lower corner of the green is going to be strongest. So what I'm going for here is the lower left corner. So if we take a look at this one just here, I'm going to be applying it in that kind of C shape, so kind of like an L shape really, in that lower left part of the gems, that sort of area just there. Now what's important to continue is wherever the gem's laid out in the miniature, you apply it in that same area relative to the miniature standing up. So that means when we get to this one here that you can see is at a slightly different angle, it means we still have to focus towards that left hand side, and because it's angled a bit more, it's going to be not quite so much underneath. So that sort of area just there. So now it's just a matter of looking around the miniature for all of your jade green gems and doing this on each one. With that done, we can now move on to Sybarite green, and we're looking to generally repeat this process, only just focusing the colour a little bit more towards that lower left of each gem and also making the line a little bit thinner. So again, it's that sort of L shape, that kind of crescent shape along there like that, just focusing it a little bit more. And then finally, we just need to add a very small amount of Gorse Blaster green just in the furthest lowest left corner of each of these gems. Once you reach that stage on those green gems, the next thing to do is to do the same sort of thing on those sort of pinkish purple gems that we're doing. And for this, what we need first of all is some Genestealer purple, followed by some Decala lilac, and then finally we need some matte white, and this is going to be for all the gems to give the kind of specular highlight to finish them off. But first we need Genestealer purple, and the application of this is going to be just like what we were doing on the greens. We basically want to pick that same corner that we did for the greens and then just start to build it up in the same sort of way, so that kind of crescent shape. So you just need to prepare your paint for that purpose, and then it's just a matter of looking for those gems that we base coated with Screamer pink. So for example, the one on the forehead, let's look for that same corner, so the lower left in this case, and just gently apply it in that sort of crescent shape. Once that's done, we're then ready for some Decala lilac, and with this we just want to repeat this process, but just as that slightly finer line, just a bit more focused towards the lower left. And then finally we can move on to finishing off these gems by applying a highlight of matte white each one, so both the purplish pinkish ones and also the green. And for this we just need a dot of this colour, just matte white, just applied as a little dot in the opposite corner to give that sort of reflective highlight, just there like that. Now once this is done, you're ready to apply any decals you may want to put onto the loincloth of your miniature, and then you're ready to base it. And as ever, it's entirely your choice what basing scheme you go for. In this case, I'm going to go for a desert base. And there we are, with that base now fully painted, the avatar of Khaine is complete and ready to lay waste to its enemies. So as you've seen, painting this miniature is actually very straightforward, but there are a few key features to really take your time on to achieve those really smooth blends, because details like this are what really sell the miniature. So when you're doing the armour and also that sword, remember, really take your time on these features to get those nice smooth gradients from one colour to another. But otherwise, have fun painting your avatar, and we'll see you again very soon.